This is the Troutbitten podcast.
Troutbitten.
Troutbitten?
Troutbitten.
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 Yeah, Troutbitten.
Troutbitten.
It's about trout.
Wild trout.
This is Troutbitten.
This is the Troutbitten podcast, and thanks for tuning in. My name is Dominic Swantowski. I'm the owner of Troutbitten and the author of Troutbitten.com. All right, my friends, just 2 more episodes left in this dry fly skills season, and tonight, this discussion is all about rise forms and hook sets. So in the last couple weeks, we've talked a lot about choosing the next fly, when to change, and what informs our decisions about what to change. Basically, how do we develop that next theory about what fly, what water type, and then even what presentation style to test. And I suppose we hinted at tonight's topic a little bit last week when we talked about watching how trout are rising to naturals. How are they taking our fly? Or even how are they rejecting it? Now that information goes a long way. It's often the predominant factor for choosing an appropriate fly style. Maybe it's a low rider or an emerger style, or maybe one that rides high and rolls on the surface a bit. So when you fish long enough, you start to notice these kind of details. And like anything else worth pursuing, you kind of realize that there's an almost endless world of data out there for you to pick up on while you're fishing. The trout are telling us a lot, even by not rising. We also learn by not catching trout, too. If you get a great presentation in a spot that you know holds trout, but nobody eats it, like, good, fair enough. And you start to consider the next adjustment. It's all a lot of fun when you realize that good fishing really isn't luck. It's attention to detail with an open mind and willingness to dive into that mystery. And then some good luck. All right, then tonight, rise forms and hook sets with a dry fly. Matt Grobe is here with me. And Matt, how many trout did you catch today?
A goose egg. But
you didn't fish though.
But I saw a few rise forms.
Did you?
Yeah.
On a drive home?
Yeah. Drive home. I crossed it. Oh, man. I should count one day. At least 4 different places I could fish.
No kidding.
And there was a evening spinner hatch, very light, but I saw fish rising to the spent wings.
How fast were you going?
No, I stopped. Right? I always glass a pool. You know, I go over a bridge and just, every day I'm not in traffic. It's not like it's a dirt road. So I stop and just gaze down at the bend hole. And there's those fish just taunting with the rise forms, right? It's a way of taunting the angler.
You just have to keep driving most days.
And I had to keep driving today to do this damn podcast, Dom. No.
You had to get home.
No, you got to get home, man. But it's pretty cool to, that's in your brain, right? All things trout all the time. As soon as I get in the car, I'm like, I wonder if they're rising down there.
Well, I take the detour. It takes me about an extra minute. I could go route A, but I go route B all the time because it takes me beside my home water.
Sure.
And I'm looking for all kinds of stuff on that water.
Think of all that, like all the time spent.
Yeah.
When you're off the water, whether it's tying flies, reading books. I mean, you have a whole other thing going on, but me driving, you driving, just, so data, research, know. So if I would have went back there with my rod for tomorrow, I'm going to that pool and I'm expecting fish to be rising.
That's right. Because there are habits of fish, and often those become daily habits until they don't, until the next thing happens. That's what we mean by a life on the water.
Yep.
It really is. That's another good example.
Absolutely.
Hey, let's do a listener question. Did one last week. Here's another. Obviously, we don't answer all of them. I try to pick ones that I think, are either being asked a lot by multiple people, I don't know, or just bringing us to a point that should probably be made. And here's one. This is from Mark Mercy by way of the website comments section. And he says, Dom, this is a good lineup of podcast topics for dry flies. Well done. Quick question. When are you guys going to talk about rods and reels? You guys talk a lot about leaders, but I think the rod is just as important. What do you think, bud? Start us off.
Yeah, I would say to Mark, the rod, in my opinion, I disagree. I think it's one of the least important tools.
Yeah, right.
I think the form, position, way you move, all these things we've discussed on the Dry Fly Skills Series, tips that we've given anglers. Really, has nothing to do with the rod.
I know.
And the flex and the the weight and or the length to a certain degree, right? I mean,
Yeah, sure.
I'm not going to try to say a spay rod or whatever is going to help my dry fly casting, but
Right.
it just doesn't, you and I both started with probably a yellow Fenwick of some sort. And
Pretty similar.
yeah. And, I would say that had nothing to do with my success. And as today, I'm fortunate to fish different rods, but I wouldn't say any of them provide or give me any type of advantage out on the water.
I'm with all of that. I agree. When I got this question a few times, I don't know, in the last week about gear. Hey, you guys going to get to the gear? I'm thinking like, nah, we're probably not going to. We did talk a lot about leaders, and we're going to talk about a leader, I'm sure, tonight, because like we say so often, I think that matters way more than the rod. By the way, the reel means nothing. Nothing. There is no reel that's better or worse for dry fly fishing. Nobody's going to convince me otherwise. The reel is just holding the line and then you crank it. Do you like to have a drag or do you want to go click and pawl?
Right. And you want it to hold up, right? I mean, that's it. That's like part of the reel piece. I just want it to not fail.
Yeah, that's all of our gear, right? That's the number one thing. From the beginning, man, like 10 years ago when you and I started talking about fishing together on the Troutbitten, private forum we had, that's what we all were looking for. We're like, well, does this hold up? What's the durability on this? How long does this last? Because that matters most. Yep. No, I'm with you. I don't think the rod matters much. And so, no, we're not going to talk about it. I will tell you that Harvey leader we talk about all the time works well. I've never fished a one weight. I've never fished a one weight in my life, but I've fished a 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 with that Harvey. And I've never fished it on a 7, but I hardly ever fish 7 weights. And when I do, it's with a sinking line and streamers. Yep. So I've had people asking me as well, like, how do you adjust the Harvey if you're fishing a 6 weight? I'm like, I don't. You know what I mean? I'm adjusting the casting stroke, the power of the casting stroke. But no, I don't adjust the leader any differently if I'm fishing the 2 or the 6 weight. Now, it needs to match the tippet section, and things about the leader need to match the fly and the moment, like we've talked about. But no, the gear, man, I'm with you. Pick a rod you like. Go fish it.
Economically and, whatever's in your wheelhouse. Don't think you're going to get an advantage by paying for something more expensive.
No, there's personal preference, and that's about it. I will say there's maybe one caveat to that. We aren't here casting for distance. We're not trying to bang 67-foot, 70-foot casts out there.
Right. We're fishing for trout.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. This is Troutbitten.
But and I know guys that, shoot line and whatnot. And I think we're targeting trout in moving water.
Yeah.
And the only time I don't want to speak on behalf of you, but have to really push some line out there is when the river's deep and you just can't wade to that particular spot. You want to get to some rising trout, but that's can be a scary thing to work on casting that long because the chances of hooking a fish with that much line out, I mean, it diminishes by every 3 to 5 feet of line you got out.
Right. Every time I'm in that situation and I do reach those trout that are way out there, they're rising, I can't wade anymore, and I do reach them and they even eat. Like you say, you got so much line to pick up. The hook set, which we'll talk about, it's bad. So I use my 10-foot 4-weight for almost everything. That's my game. That's why I choose it. It's snappy enough to make that longest cast that I'm going to need to make. It's delicate enough to make, I don't know, the most graceful, elegant casts that land whisper quiet on the flattest water with the most sensitive fish. I can just kind of do everything with it. Yep. And that's why I choose it. And nymph with it. We nymph with it. We fish streamers with. Most of us are like one rod guys. Yep. Not that we don't have a lot of other rods.
Too many rods,
yeah. So there you go, Mark. That's our best answer. And, we don't have to do it our way, but those are our thoughts, and you ask for them. You ask for it.
There it is.
There it is. All right, Matt, let's do it. Rise forms. Let's start with rise forms, talk about that for a while, and then we'll get to hook sets. So we'll cover these two concepts. These are two skills that definitely go hand in hand. That's why they're grouped together in this podcast episode. So let me mention, too, that we've certainly talked about all this stuff throughout the, I guess, almost 3 years now of doing this Troutbitten podcast. In many episodes, we've talked about hook sets. We've talked about rise forms. Just last season, we dedicated a full episode on June 9th, 2024. It was in season 11, and it was titled Set the Hook, all about different hook sets. That was with the full crew. And in that one, we covered hook sets across the spectrum of fly fishing for trout. So streamers, nymphs, wets, dries, even nymphs under an indicator, throwing indicators around. We covered all of that in one, probably about an hour podcast. And that's a good one to go back and listen to almost as a primer, I suppose, for this one, or as a companion for this one. But tonight, it's just about dry flies. So we have a chance to kind of open it up more, open the subject up a little more. And we'll just talk about rise forms and hook sets for dry flies. So Matt, how about we start here? What are you looking for out there when it comes to rise forms? Keep it simple. I mean, what are we looking for?
Sure. When we're, for me, when I'm approaching the water, it's that piece is going to educate me on the tactic that I'm about to deploy on the water.
Yeah.
If there's no rise forms, I'm probably, depending on the time of year, either going to consider prospecting for trout to understand, or just to kind of say, okay, well, I got a chance if I'm, if it's hopper season or ant season, there's not as many rise forms right now out there, but that'll just help me with the fact that I'm going to prospect. And if we see, different rise forms out there, that's going to help better educate me on what pattern I'm going to have. And the other day, like I said, when I drove past that bridge and I saw those dimple rises and those little subtle rise forms and noticed those spent wings on the water, right? All of a sudden, I'm in this mindset of, this is the tactic I'm going to deploy. I'm going to target these consistently rising fish that are eating spent wing spinners, with my Harvey leader, and I'm going to approach the water like this, and I'm going to cover it with a rusty spinner. So what about you? I mean, what do you do when you're approaching the water and you're looking at those rise forms?
Let me jump in there and say too, I think the cool thing about seeing that it's a spinner, for example, is that it really probably is predictable. You probably could go back tomorrow and around the same time, because it's a repeatable event, and the trout know that too. That's a neat thing about that kind of rise. You made a good point up front that lots of times they're not rising, and we all know that. What is it, maybe 10% of our whole time on the water where you're actually getting a chance to fish over rising trout? That might be a generous percentage. I don't know anybody who doesn't love fishing over rising trout. You get the target, you get to see your success, their response. All of that is a ton of fun. Tonight, we're going to talk mostly about different rise forms and the way we will respond, with patterns and then even with hook set styles. But I guess most of this conversation then tonight is kind of assuming that we do have a rise form out there.
Right.
And like you're saying, you're not always going to have that. But that does not mean that I'm not going to fish dries. I mean, I've been fishing dries all summer long as my primary tactic right now, just because it's fun. I know you're kind of doing the same thing. I don't need to see heads and rise forms to feel like I'm going to have success, because it's proven out over time. I could probably go out there and catch a dozen trout tomorrow morning, just prospecting. I may not see another rise except the fish that come up and eat my fly. That's how it goes. Whether it's after a fishing trip or at a backyard fire, you can bet the Troutbitten crew has a case of New Trail Broken Heels along with us. It's honestly our favorite beer. This hazy IPA is smooth and full-bodied. Hand-selected Citra hops lead to notes of bright clementine and juicy ruby red grapefruit. Broken Heels is a keeper. New Trail beer is proudly brewed in Williamsport, Pennsylvania, and delivered cold to your favorite craft beer retailer every week. At New Trail, it's not about being the best angler. It's about getting out there. So enjoy nature's moments and reward yourself for a day well fished with New Trail Broken Heels. It's Troutbitten's favorite beer. The landscape is changing for trout anglers. No doubt you've already noticed another truck at your favorite access point and seen more anglers on the water. For those looking for new challenges and fishing opportunities, Trout Routes has the data to help you avoid the crowds and explore new public water. Trout Routes has mapped more than 50,000 trout streams across the country with curated, detailed maps of public land and access points. Trout Routes has developed integrated and interactive data, putting the tools in your hands to research new water and help you navigate in the wild to know exactly where you stand in the current. It's still up to you to find those deep pools and undercuts, but Trout Routes helps you get on the water, connecting you with resources like fly shops and stream gauges for trout water across the country. Download Trout Routes in the App Store today. Then use the code Troutbitten for 20% off your membership at maps.troutroutes.com.
Would you say right now, this time of year when it's terrestrial heavy,
Yeah.
and there's the lack of rise forms, that this is the most common time of year to be prospecting with non-rising fish?
Yes, absolutely. I feel like on a good year, that'll go, for us, clear into the middle of October, and then all of a sudden it's like a switch is flipped. And within a day or two, I just can't buy a fish. And then I have to kind of go back to, all right, I don't see rise forms. I'm probably wasting my time. I'm going to fish streamers or nips.
Do you get sad?
What's that? I kind of do. I
always get sad.
Well,
Like,
I get a little sad, but then you live in a place that has 4 seasons as well.
Yeah.
And I love living in a place like this where I can get kind of sad that part of the season is over,
Right.
but boy, am I excited for streamer season.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we fish streamers all year too, just like we'll fish dry flies all year. But there is a real prime thing coming up in the fall where trout respawn pretty reliably in those good years to streamers, and that's fun. And then we do something in the winter, then we do something in the spring.
Sure.
And I love it. I love the changes. Yeah, so let's talk about different rise forms. I don't know. Break them down into 3. How about this? Splashy, kind of, I'm going to say standard, and then subtle.
I like that. Splashy rises, to me, depending on the time of year, mean a couple different things. When I see splashy rises, like within a stonefly emergence, I sense that opportunistic fish that grasps that bug because they know it's less abundant. I mean, they're out there, but the adult form of stoneflies and many caddis they're just not on the water long all the time, right?
Yeah.
They're dapping, they're splashing, and when you see the fish react in that manner, it just for me it means that those bugs aren't on the water quick.
Yeah.
But they're paying attention and they're noticing. And boy, if they have an opportunity to come and eat that bug, they're doing it almost recklessly because they have to.
Yeah, the trout knows what speed it needs to achieve, basically, to capture the bug. And we all know that a trout just doesn't want to waste energy. They're conservationists, right? And if they can rise subtly, which we'll talk about in a second, they will. But if they feel, I think, like they got to get it quick, they will. You're pointing out a good thing. Like that, to me, does mean around here, mostly caddis. We don't have nearly as many stoneflies and salmon flies like you guys do. So to me, it's almost always caddis. When they're really, splashy rise. It's not that they won't rise splashy for, for duns they're lifting off quick on a dry day too.
I think this is a very often overlooked tool an angler doesn't deploy often, especially in bug healthy areas like you're living in or like I'm living in, where often that bug is often hatching with other different bugs out there. So you might, as an angler, pay attention to the mayfly that's on the water that produces a different rise we'll get into in a minute, and neglect the fact that the fish are splashing around. And that can be a trigger, the clue to what they're eating, right? And there's some advice some my dad's old friends would tell me, the young, when I would fish with them, I'm the young buck spastic to jump in the water and just start fishing, right? And they would just, wise old man sitting on the bank taking it in. And I see the benefit of that at times, to just take a deep breath and watch what's going on out there, and it might give you a clue to what could be successful.
Sure. I think water type matters, well, in all of these rises too. Sometimes I think they'll just go get it quick and kind of have a splashy rise because the water's quick.
Good point.
I've seen them take spinners not very often, but I've seen what I think they're taking a spinner, but it can end up to be a splashy rise if they're eating a spinner that's out in the middle, which they don't do so much.
Yeah, it's just a good point that you can get I love the fact that that's one of those nuances, right? That there's always something, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, well, that was a splashy rise on a spent wing spinner, to your point, because the fish has to eat it quick.
Yeah.
Right. And you got momentum of the water coming down, and it creates a certain rise form because of the nature of where the trout's lying. I love that part.
So let's go almost the opposite. Let's skip over that middle one. We'll get back to it. But I mean, let's kind of say the opposite is that real subtle rise. You said a little dimple. Kind of describe it the same way then? Is that what you mean by a subtle rise? Like just
Yeah. Like you get the luxury of inspecting and looking at a lazy eat.
Yeah.
It tends to be a subtle rise often. And oftentimes that to me means maybe two things. One, they're in water, they can inspect, and they don't have to rush to eat. And two, there are so many of the naturals on the water, whether it's a mayfly stuck on the water or
good point.
A spinner that we keep talking about, but those fish can just get into that rhythm, right? I often see that, not always, but a subtle rise sometimes is more like you'll see the fish get into a more frequent eating rhythm with those, as opposed to the splashy rise that we just talked about that's a little bit more opportunistic. What do you think about that?
Oh yeah, these are opposite ends of the spectrum. For me, I love fishing the trichos, and we're fishing trichos spinners, not the duns.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the classic situation to me, where it's just the nose of the trout that comes out of the surface. They're just, or sometimes just underneath, they open their mouth and suck the fly under.
Mm-hmm.
That's the subtle rise. And again, the trout is eating. Well, they're eating tricho spinners, especially in some of the softest water you can find, often bank water. Often they'll come up and, slurp a bunch down all at once, but still subtle.
Sure.
But in general, when I see a subtle rise, I'm thinking about choosing a pattern then that imitates a bug that's laying flat, or that's easily available or trapped in the surface. Like we talked about last week, these are not patterns that are kind of rocking and rolling on the top, on their hackle tips. When I see the splashy rises, I'm choosing that Catskill style.
I like that.
Or an elk hair caddis, classic elk hair, which just kind of roll on the surface and skitter them around and things like that, and try to match what the trout is trying to do. I will say, if you see a fish eat one time, maybe it just did that one time, But if you get the opportunity to really watch a working fish and you see he's chasing, not chasing, but he's, eating pretty aggressively every time.
Sure.
Or, wow, that trout just ate 6 tricho spinners about every 7 seconds. His nose came up.
Yeah. Would you say that's one of the most exciting opportunities as a dry fly fisherman? I think we might have talked about it this season, but I might have mentioned the stone. Like, I love fishing salmon flies. But, man, it's hard to argue when they're in that rhythm and you're in that rhythm and you're trying to pick off those heads on those subtle rises with a low riding fly or a spinner fly. That's what dry fly fishing is all about in general, right? That's when it's good.
I do think it's the most challenging situation too. I don't think it takes a special skill set like we talked about last week, but you just need good cast. Don't spook the fish. You might only get one chance. Yes. That's a fun game. It can also be frustrating. I think it's kind of the pinnacle of the game. Not that it's the best thing out there, but it is challenging in that way. Almost the polar opposite is when they are just banging those hoppers. I guess, you get more experience on that, right? But they hit them pretty hard, right? Pretty aggressive.
Oh, yeah.
And the salmon flies too.
They hit them hard, and there's the level of unexpectedness because you're not seeing those rise forms that adds excitement. So it's just completely different, right? It's a completely different, all fun, all awesome, but all derived from what the water's telling us in the rise forms, right?
Yeah.
That action often correlates with those rise forms, and it's pretty cool.
All of that definitely informs our decision about what to do next.
Yep.
And what to really kind of look for in the air and on the water, and then go, oh, I missed that. You know. So I guess in the middle though is what we see most is, I don't know what else to call it except your kind of standard half casual kind of rise. Trout's like,
Right.
all right, I'll eat that. Medium pace, not really eager, but knowing too, like, I better get it, you know, or
Right.
you know, I can't be too slow about this. I don't know.
Yeah.
I think I see that a lot more than anything else.
Yeah, and I wonder if it just, you know, sometimes it coincides with them being spoiled by the amount of food on the surface that they can just get away with that casual, oh, I'm going to pick off a Hendrickson, and now I'm going to pick off a blue quill, or, you know, and out here it can be similar of that standard casual rise form. And, you know, I think to us, it means there's awareness that there are food forms on the surface.
There you go.
And, you know, that there's opportunity for an angler to fool those fish.
Yeah, but not necessarily a whole lot more. Like we're saying,
Right.
hey, you can really tell something when you get these subtle rises and use flat profile, you know, flies. Or, hey, you can really tell something with these splashy rises and, you know, probably a caddis. They're probably eating caddis or stoneflies.
Right.
Things that are moving. Those tell you more. But this kind of in the middle of the road, really more standard rise, more frequent style of rise, you don't necessarily learn a whole lot from it, except what you said. Hey, you got a fish that's looking up. And if there's one, there's probably more.
Right.
And I've seen him eat every type of fly with this kind of standard, hey, I'm going to eat it.
Yep.
You know?
Yep.
Nothing real descriptive about it. There's nothing remarkable, I should say,
Right.
about that kind of standard rise. So I don't know what kind of fly to choose by just watching that rise.
Right.
Yeah.
No, that one is. I mean, that would be a difficult one to try to dissect.
Right on. Before we jump into hook sets, I have one more. What about a trout that comes all the way out of the water? You've seen them do this when they kind of jump like a dolphin. You know what I mean? Have you seen
Right.
that? Yeah.
Oh yeah. You know, I don't know what your theory is, but I'm always assuming that they're trying to hit that emerging insect and it just projects them out of the water from a velocity standpoint. It's like a sprinter trying to come to a stop quickly. There's a little bit of that momentum that just projects them up into the air.
Yeah.
What do you think? What have you seen?
I mean, I remember reading that when I was, you know, young and trying to learn all this stuff. And I forget exactly who it was, but they said, hey, they're probably just chasing insects to the surface. Like you said, emergers that are still under, and then they still have momentum and they just keep on going.
Sure.
There's another thing that happens, and there's no doubt about this. I've seen this in warmer water. When the water starts to get warm, I've seen bigger trout jump out of the water. There are some streams around here that they should not stock because they get up to like 75, 80 degrees.
Mm-hmm.
And these trout are kind of in distress.
Oh.
And I've read about this too. And yeah, they'll jump when they're in distress. I don't know if they're trying to get extra oxygen. I shouldn't theorize on it. I don't know why, but they'll jump. I've seen them do that. And I've seen it most on...
Huh.
It's
Interesting.
About every summer. I go there to actually catch some stocked fish that have been in there for 3 or 4 months by then to keep them and eat them because I like doing that. Yeah, about once a year I'll see a fish or two do that on a particular day.
I'll jump in because I see it on rivers that get lake run trout.
Okay.
For whatever reason, they project themselves out of the water, and I know there's a reason. I'm sure some of our listeners know. I don't know if it's them getting excited for the spawn or what, but often they project themselves out of the water, and you just see these big fish launching out of the water.
Don't steelhead do that?
They probably
to
do.
rid themselves of sea lice or something like that.
They could. I'm not a big steelhead guy.
Right.
I'm a trout bitten nerd, but it'd be interesting to hear if folks comment on the podcast.
I was gonna say, we're about to start talking about things we don't know about, so we should move on.
Trout bitten.
That's right. All right, dude. Hook sets. Hook set. Let's do this. Go hook set direction. We talked through this stuff on the other podcast, but this one's just about dry flies. Hook set direction. For me, it's almost always downstream. Downstream as much as possible.
Sure.
You know, I've been wearing that action cam a lot, and I'm surprised how often, I guess I shouldn't be, but the trout eat right in the middle of a mend. And then I'm mending, and often I'm mending line upstream. So my rod's already gone that way, and I end up setting the hook upstream,
Yep.
you know, in an upstream direction, sweeping my rod that way because that's the way it's already gone. And I miss a lot of fish that way.
Yep.
I don't know if there's a way to correct it. All I'm saying is I would much prefer to set the hook in a downstream direction. So whatever it takes to pull the hook downstream, in a downstream direction. Even if you're fishing downstream, like we talked about last week, if you're fishing downstream, I'm still sweeping the rod downstream.
Yep.
I don't lift it upstream.
Sure.
What about you?
I'm similar, downstream whenever I can. Even I'm trying to think here. Even if I'm in the boat, I'm still trying to set on that downstream side.
So we set downstream as much as possible because it sets the hook into the fish instead of pulling it away from the fish. If you set, the fish is faced upstream. If you set the hook upstream, if you pull that line at all upstream, well, then you're kind of pulling the fly away from the fish. So I like to sweep low and downstream. I'm not one for, hey, lift the rod. I think that's like a Stillwater mindset. Like, lift the rod, set the hook. I'm usually sweeping to the side and almost always downstream when I can.
Do you try to pull line with your left hand?
Sometimes, whatever that takes, right? So that kind of comes to distance, right?
Right.
Aiden has been oversetting when we fish for trout because he's fishing for bass a lot on a boat with my buddy Brad and his son Brady. And he's breaking off. He's setting too far, right? We're using 4X, 5X, sometimes 6X. He's setting too far. And I've been telling him, just tighten up, and that's enough. So that's the distance for me. But I don't know how much slack I have out there, right? I can't say to people, hey, you need a 10-inch hook set. You probably need more than that. I'm going to tell people there is no set distance. Just like there's no timing on the cast, right? It matters how much line is out there. So in this case, it matters how much slack is on the water. We have provided slack to the dry fly. How much do I have to pick up? Well, I got to pick up all of that, tighten up, and that'll be enough, right? Don't over tighten, I guess, because you'll break. That's the distance. I don't know if there is a distance, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's like you said, it's the whole point is to, lodge that hook in that fish's mouth and whatever you need to do to make that happen, right? It's variable.
It is big time. I think that might be the thing that's most variable is that distance.
Yep.
All depends on the slack. Since 2006, Yeti has been building products for anglers who fish hard and share an addiction for the woods and the water. Yeti changed the industry with their legendary coolers by featuring rugged but simple designs built to last for generations and stand up to whatever Mother Nature might bring. Yeti now takes that same functional and elegant design to everything in their lineup, from soft coolers to drinkware, bags, and more. The new Yeti Go Box gear cases have become my daily storage solution for a life on the water. Offered in 3 sizes, the Go Boxes are rugged and waterproof at home on a boat or in the back of a pickup. All Yeti Go Boxes offer smart storage solutions with removable cargo trays and dividers, and the Pack Attic is a set of zippered pockets conveniently housed in the interior lid of the 30 and 60 sizes. Lockable, light, and nearly indestructible. I use the 15 size Go Box for camera gear and the 30 size for organizing my reels, fly boxes, leaders, tippet, and everything else that keeps me fishing. The Yeti Loadout Go Boxes are the perfect angler's companion. For over a decade, Smith Creek has designed and built outstanding gear for the serious angler. Smith Creek's Rod Rack is the perfect solution to store up to 7 pre-rigged fly rods safely inside your vehicle. Each kit comes with 2 heavy-duty suction cups and 3 mounting methods. If your vehicle has bolt holes in the rear headliner, Smith Creek now offers free M6 eye bolts with your proof of purchase. The Smith Creek Rod Rack has been my choice for rod storage for the last 5 years because I prefer to keep my rods in the vehicle, rigged up and ready to go, without the need for a rod vault on the top of the vehicle. All Smith Creek gear is backed by outstanding customer service, no matter where or when you bought it. To stay up to date on their latest specials, follow them on Instagram at Smith Creek NZ. Quality you can depend on from a brand you can trust. Smith Creek. So hook speed, this is the one we'll talk about the most, and this is the one we need to adjust to. Just like we choose different flies for these rise forms that we see, all those kind of, those 3 rise forms that we talked about, like to me, they kind of require a different hook set, or at least they're best matched with a specific kind of hook set, let's say speed.
Oh, for sure. I mean, for me personally, if I got those subtle rises, especially in slower water, my hook set speed's a little bit less than if I'm fishing that fast water with the splashy rise, right? Those are things that I need to be on my game and attuned to in order to get consistent hookups.
Yeah, we should mention too, when we say speed, I'm talking about speed of response to the fish. When I see the rise, do I boom, set right away?
Right.
Well, with splashy rises, yes, I'm going to set as fast as possible.
Yep.
And with that subtle one, like we keep saying about the spinners, if they're slow and casual, then that's what I try to be, is kind of slow, casual, give them a chance, take my time. We've said before, the thing is to say, God save the queen, and then you set your hook, right? Yep. And I don't really go that far, but I just try to match their pace. I said this on the other podcast, and I've thought about that a lot since we did that episode. I really do. If I'm kind of ready for anything, and if I see a fish eat fast, boom, I'm setting fast. If I see the fish, I don't know, eat at that medium pace, then I'm going to set. Whatever. It's the speed of response. That's what we mean. And then you're also going to have expectations. If you're fishing over, again, a trico spinner fall, and you have a fish that's casually rising over and over, you really don't expect to be setting the hook real fast, right?
Right.
You're trying to dial yourself down.
Sure. Constantly have to be aware. I mean, and those are all good examples of when to change the hook set speed. And I've said this on this podcast a couple times, ever since coming out here, I noticed that there's certain species, specifically from my experience, cutthroat trout, our native species, I will say, in this country, the brook trout and the cutthroat trout are notoriously slow eaters. They are not as predatory driven as a brown trout. Although many times that the rise, form is dictated by the bugs and all those things, this species of fish can play a role. And I oftentimes set slow when I'm on dominant cutthroat heavy streams because they will eat more consistently slow, whether that is a caddisfly or a spinner. They often neglect those bugs that are harder to eat and stay with that methodic, slow, lazy eat. They're very notorious for being lazy eaters. They get that nickname well. And I've seen brook trout in a similar fashion. And I don't know if you were up, fishing for brookies not long ago. I don't know if you ever
I've been doing a lot lately.
Took notice of that, of the slow reaction time of brook trout.
I don't know. When you talked about that once before, and I'm sure the cutties are different. I feel like the brookies, I think it's probably the water style that I fish them in. I feel like they're fast for me.
Okay.
I guess that's probably the difference.
Yeah, it could be. And these brook trout aren't native out here either. I mean, they're wild fish, but cutties for certain are lazy, and maybe the brook trout I'm fishing for just dumb brook trout, dumb invasive
knuckle dragon.
Anyway, something to think about if you're traveling right outside of your home waters.
I got one more question for you. Do you think you can tell the size of a fish from a rise form?
If it is, you mentioned earlier, the snout or nose, right, coming up out of the water at times, I've definitely noticed, what I think are large fish in that capacity when I, see their nose coming out. As far as the ripple effect with that, what the disturbance of the water around the rise, I can't say there's an indication. I can tell you from a subtle, dimple rise producing fairly large fish, I've seen that. So I would say it doesn't.
I know.
Very well.
Okay, it's kind of hard for me to put my finger on, but I know there's lots of times where I go, that's a little fish. No, that's just a little fish rising over there. And, you're usually right about it. And there's lots of times too where we go, ooh, that looks like a bigger fish, and you catch him, and he is. And I don't think most of these times anyway, I'm fishing water where I'm actually seeing the fish, but I do see the rise form. I suppose it's the size of the rise form, but again, we're saying like some of those biggest trout just poking their noses up there.
Sure.
Are making some really small, let's say, depressions on the water surface. But I don't know. It's hard for me to put my finger on, but I do think I can tell, generally tell the size of the fish from the rise form. Not every time, but sometimes it stands out to you. Yeah.
What about the noise aspect? We talked about the rise forms, but sometimes do you ever feel like the noise is associated with the caliber fish as well?
Yeah. Of course, I fish a lot at night, and it's those startling rises that oh my gosh, there's some big sounds at night. And I would say they're not always fish either. I've turned my light on and I've seen raccoons, muskrats. I think one time it was a river otter playing around over on the outside. Yeah. I was on, and I thought for about 20 minutes that there was a big fish over there.
Sure.
Eventually, I didn't catch him. I turned my light on, and I saw a big form swimming away. It was like a seal, man.
It scares you, huh? Like, oh.
Yeah, kind of.
Hey, now.
I'm like, oh, no, that thing's in the water with me. Anyway, I don't know. I mean, that big kerplunk, right, at night. But again, we're not talking about night fishing. Sure. I don't know, man. Yeah, hey, the biggest trout I ever caught, the biggest wild trout I ever caught on that same river, but this was during the day. I was fishing, fishing to the middle. I had my back against the bank, and I heard a rise, and it was only about 15 feet upstream of me in the same water lane that I was standing in, which is the soft bank lane. And I'm like, oh, that looks, and again, I thought to myself, oh, that's a pretty big rise form. That's a big fish. Mm-hmm. And of course, I'm going to cast to it. One cast I missed kind of, and then I got, the first good cast I got, he ate it. And I remember hearing that. I didn't see it out of the corner of my eye. I heard it. So certainly you hear.
It's pretty cool.
If you're in, if you're in the right kind of water, if the water's not too loud, you can hear them.
Well, it's cool because they're little clues, right? That one, you could hear the clue, right?
Yeah,
and
nice.
How often do you try to take in the whole scene? And there's nothing more magical than a river in front of you just boiling. We call it boiling with trout.
Yeah, right.
And you gaze out, you're looking for rise forms the whole way, and then you just see that ripple, right? The remnants of the rise, and you're like 2 seconds behind actually seeing the fish come out of the water, but you quickly launch your line out to that remnant rise form. That's fun.
It is.
That's like a fun evening on the water, doing that. And I hope I get at least a half a dozen more of those before the end of the season.
Oh, you're greedy.
I am greedy. I want some.
I love it. Hey, anything else, Matt? We get it?
Yeah, I think we're good, man. I think we just good sound reminders, even for ourselves when you're approaching that water to take in those forms, because those clues really can educate you for a successful evening on the water if you take the time to take that stuff in.
Like I said in the intro, man, I mean, good fishing isn't luck. Yeah, there's an element of luck. There's an element of luck in just about every aspect of life, but you can make good things happen by being observant, having theories, solving the mysteries, and taking notice to, like you said, these details.
Yep, I like it.
And having a plan. Have a plan for the hook set.
Yep.
Don't screw it up.
Don't sloop them.
All right, buddy, read us out.
Remember, the Troutbitten Project is a free resource for all anglers. The Troutbitten website hosts over 1,000 articles with endless stories, commentaries, tactics, tips, and more. Find what you like through the top menu and through the search page. Navigate by way of the categories and tags too. Be sure to find the Troutbitten YouTube channel, now featuring the Troutbitten Tip Series, the Fish and Film Series, and the Troutbitten Fly Box, all in collaboration with Wilds Media. Thank you for listening to the Troutbitten Podcast. Please give the show a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts or Spotify and leave a comment, because that really helps. Until next time, friends, fish hard, enjoy the day, and find your life on the water. but we're fishing for trout.
This is Troutbitten.